Okay, let's dive into this. You've done the heavy lifting, right? You've faced your darkest corners, you've worked through your past, and you've integrated those really heavy psychological patterns. Now, you are probably expecting to step out of that burning building of your old self into some fresh, clean air, maybe feeling like this highly energized, spiritually awakened productivity machine. But instead, you're likely experiencing this deeply painful irony. You've completed all this profound internal work only to feel completely empty? Well, welcome to our explainer on the motivation paradox.
So, why do you feel so empty after doing the deep healing work? Listen, this question actually speaks to a very specific, almost hidden shame that a lot of you might be carrying around right now. You know the feeling. You might literally be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why on earth your internal engine is just shut off. You thought this awakening would set you on fire with purpose and drive, but instead you just feel kind of extinguished. You've stopped striving, you've stopped performing, and honestly, you're just exhausted from trying to care about things that used to matter so much to you.
Section 1. The Paradox of Healing.
To really understand why this happens, we have to look at this paradox. Now, modern society, and especially hustle culture, is going to look at your sudden lack of drive and instantly label it as a failure, or a regression, or maybe even clinical depression. But Carl Jung, the pioneering architect of analytical psychology, viewed this exact state very differently. Through his extensive clinical work, Jung discovered that roughly 73% of people experience this massive, incredibly disorienting drop in motivation after completing deep shadow work. So if you're feeling aimless right now, it is absolutely not proof that you're broken. It's actually statistical psychological proof that your healing worked.
Jung famously noted that, unfortunately, there's really no doubt that man is on the whole less good than he imagines himself or wants to be, and that everyone carries a shadow. He understood that excavating our unconscious wounds doesn't just heal a few bad memories. No, it fundamentally dismantles how motivation previously operated within your psyche. When you dive into that deep well to confront the shadow, the parts of yourself you really had no wish to be, you're actually actively destroying the old fuel source that used to run your entire life.
And that old fuel source? Well, it was almost entirely based on shadow projection. Basically, that means unconsciously seeing in external goals what you couldn't accept within yourself. Before your healing, your ambition was very likely just sophisticated anxiety wearing a productivity costume. You were driven by this unconscious, desperate need to prove you weren't lazy, to prove you weren't weak, or to project your worth onto the opinions of everyone else. But when shadow work integrates those rejected qualities, suddenly you don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. But, and here's the kicker, as a result, you also lose that massive driving force.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 2, the collapse of the persona.
You see, what you actually lost recently wasn't your motivation at all. What you lost was your persona. By definition, the persona is the mask we wear to fit into society. It's the performed identity, not who we really are. You literally cannot chase applause once you've realized the stage is entirely made of illusion. So you feel aimless right now simply because you've shed the identity that actually required a destination in the first place. And this brilliantly illustrates just how stark the contrast is between these two operating systems. On one side, we have persona motivation, ego-driven hustle like, I must succeed to prove I'm worthy. Honestly, it's exhausting. But on the other side, we see authentic motivation. This is the quiet, sustainable drive of the true self, where the process itself is what fulfills you. When your persona collapses, your psychological system literally begins to reject everything artificial, forced, or inauthentic.
Jung actually mapped this entire journey out in his clinical framework into 4 stages of shadow integration. First, you recognize the shadow. Second, you withdraw those projections from the outside world. Third, you integrate the shadow material. But it's this 4th stage where you are very likely stuck right now, reorganization. It is a profoundly disorienting motivational reformation period. The script your ego followed has literally been burned to ashes, but a new script hasn't been written yet.
Which brings us to Section 3, entering the sacred void.
Look, if society wants to call this laziness or demotivation, just let them. We are correctly relabeling this as a deeply necessary incubation period for your soul. Jung used this absolutely fascinating Greek word to describe what you're going through, ananiadromia. It's the phenomenon where something, when taken to its absolute extreme, transforms into its exact opposite. The pendulum of your life had to swing from the manic, frantic striving of the ego all the way over to the hollow stillness of the soul. Why? Because psychological balance literally demands it. You just can't swing back to the middle without first visiting the opposite extreme.
In alchemical terms, which, by the way, Jung absolutely loved to use, this is the nigredo phase, the blackening.
the psychological death required for rebirth, where the ego is totally dismantled. I really want to assure you that this is not a regression. Not at all. It's a sacred descent into the unknown. Think of it like the chrysalis phase. Before a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it doesn't just sprout wings and fly away. It completely dissolves into this unstructured, undefined goo. That's what's happening right now. Your old operating system is dissolving.
And if you feel like you're just wasting time, let's just look at Jung's own historical timeline for some perspective. In 1913, he broke away from Sigmund Freud, and his old academic motivations completely died. For 6 full years, leading up to 1919, Jung endured a period of apparent, absolute unproductivity. From the outside, he looked totally stagnant, but internally, he was undergoing this profound creative incubation that eventually birthed his greatest, life-changing psychological theories. The waiting was definitely not wasted time.
Section 4. The birth of authentic drive. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it teases the emergence of an entirely new kind of energy for you.
Because the void doesn't last forever. Eventually, this new drive begins to stir within you. Jung observed 3 distinct clinical patterns in people whose shadows successfully integrated. First, you'll feel a drastically decreased tolerance for meaningless, collective activities. Second, your authenticity detection totally spikes. You can instantly sense performative behavior in a room. And third, you start naturally recognizing and honoring your own energy rhythms. This is exactly why you suddenly pull away from conventional, performative pursuits that used to completely dominate your calendar.
When this authentic motivation finally arrives, it feels completely different. Forced productivity relies entirely on willpower. It depletes your energy, and it's always seeking external validation. But natural emergence, it follows your curiosity, it actually generates energy, and it finds intrinsic satisfaction. Authentic motivation doesn't roar like some frantic survival instinct. It hums quietly. It doesn't urge you to return to what was, but invites you to build what has never yet been, naturally aligning with the absolute deepest aspects of your nature.
As Jung so beautifully put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This entire excruciating, yet incredibly beautiful process is ultimately about individuation. It is about becoming real, rather than simply becoming praised. Your soul is literally refusing to participate in a life it no longer resonates with.
Section 5. Navigating your psychological rebirth. So how do we actually survive this in-between space? Because honestly, the worst thing you can do right now is try to force false solutions just to make other people comfortable. Jung laid out a clinical roadmap for these exact transition states. First is the radical acceptance of the void. You have to stop the judgment of your own stillness. Second is utilizing active imagination. Third, following the transcendent function by holding the tension of just not knowing. And finally, surrendering to individuation. You absolutely have to honor your natural psychological timing over society's incredibly rushed manufactured timelines.
Let's look a bit closer at Jung's core technique here, active imagination. It's all about engaging with the unconscious through imagery, feeling, and creative expression without forcing logical action. When you're in the void, your conscious mind is terribly confused, right? But your unconscious has immense wisdom. Active imagination bridges that gap. It's about paying attention to subtle impulses, images, and feelings without demanding they make perfect logical sense or forcing them into some immediate 10-step action plan.
To make this incredibly practical for you, here are some daily integration practices you can apply right now. Number 1, your morning practice. Toss out the traditional to-do list and instead just ask, what wants to emerge today? Number 2, your evening reflection. Review any authentic impulses you might have ignored throughout the day. And number 3, a weekly review. Aggressively discern which activities drained your ego and which ones actually sustained your soul. You're shifting your daily focus from, what should I accomplish, to what is trying to emerge.
So the crucial point is perfectly captured in one of Jung's most famous truths: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You did the incredibly brave work of making the darkness conscious. The emptiness you feel right now, that is the ultimate prize for your bravery. Your psyche is finally metabolizing years of noise and false striving.
I want you to internalize this as your new mantra. My emptiness is integration, not failure. It's the death of your fear-based, shadow-driven motivation. You didn't lose your drive, you simply outgrew the wounded projections that used to power it. Seriously, this is a moment to celebrate your profound psychological health.
So we're going to wrap up this explainer with one final thought. Stop trying to find your old motivation. It belonged to a version of you that simply no longer exists. Flip the cultural script, sit in the stillness, and ask yourself this instead. What is quietly trying to emerge through you today? Embrace that sacred pause. The self is forming something far more honest, and believe me, it is absolutely worth the wait.